It is a real honor to be here to receive an invitation to a group that's only been, my understanding, officially in existence in a little over a year, which tells me that you're here because you fundamentally understand that there's something wrong happening in higher academia in general, particularly at this amazing, beloved university. I have a unique perspective of both UVA and this country, and sometimes it takes the perspective of someone whose family isn't from America. It has been referenced in the opening statement that while I am from Virginia Beach, I represented Virginia Beach in the House of Delegates. I was the prosecutor of Virginia Beach prior to being elected as the 48th Attorney General. But in some ways, my story doesn't begin in Virginia Beach. It begins in Havana, Cuba, when a scared 19-year-old girl got in an airplane, penniless and homeless, and not knowing where her next meal was going to come from. And that was my mother, Mary Miyares. And when you raise up in a household of someone that has literally seen the very worst forms of oppression, it gives you such a profound sense of gratitude for what this country is. I tell my daughters all the time, gratitude is one of the most underrated of all human traits. Ingratitude is one of the ugliest. Gratitude is one of the most magnificent and underrated. And I was raised to have such gratitude that I was able to be born and breathe the air as a free American. I love to talk to high school and college students, and I tell them a little bit about my mother's story. And I always ask this question, I say, why did she come here? What was so unique about the United States? She got on that plane. She originally was in Spain, and then she immigrated to the United States. Obviously, culturally, Spain would be a much easier fit for her. It's because she had this desperate desire to live in a country that recognized that her freedoms and her rights did not come from government or a government bureaucrat, that they were inalienable. And I love to tell high school students, never forget that, and I would say this to every person here, wherever you're sitting right now, this very moment, there are millions of people on this planet that would do everything in their power. They would crawl over broken glass, they would cling to the side of an airplane, be seated exactly where you're seated right now. That's to be an American. That is gratitude. I've said that what separates us from most of the people that live on this planet, that woke up this morning on this planet, is the knock at the door. When you and I hear that, our heart does not race. We don't get nervous. We're not looking over our shoulder. It's a neighbor coming over to say hello. In my case, my golden retriever got out again. Or it's maybe Amazon Prime dropping something off. But for most of the people who woke up this morning on this planet, if they hear this, that means something very different. That means the powers that be are there to take you away because you worship God in a manner you disagree with, or you've spoken out for human rights or free elections or for the dignity of the individual. That simple knock is what separates how you live your life between most of the people who live their life on this planet. That's the same knock my mother heard when Bay of Pigs happened. My uncle, Angel Miyares, was an anti-Castroite. Castro wasn't stupid. He rounded everybody up in the middle of the night that he could suspect could rise up, took him away. No due process. Castro's secret police took him to a baseball stadium and suffered the humiliation of a mock execution. No due process, no freedom of conscience. What we have, the way we live our life, is a miracle. It's what I call the American miracle. Margaret Thatcher said that in Europe, all the countries emerged out of history. America is the only country to emerge out of a philosophy. Or as G.K. Chesterton noted, America is the only country in the history of the world to be founded on a creed. What is that creed? I think the American that best encapsulates that with Dr. Martin Luther King on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, where he said those inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. He referred to that as the promissory note made to every American, past, present, and future. And he was there to collect on that promissory note. Now think about this for a second. I did a great interview on the Thomas Jefferson Hour recently. And it's a question I've actually been asked by several people, which is, are our founders still relevant, and is Thomas Jefferson still relevant in today's age? And I pointed out that when Dr. King made that challenge about the promissory note, those inalienable rights, who wrote the promissory note? He didn't point to a philosopher in Asia, didn't point to Confucius, didn't point to Rousseau. He pointed to a quiet, unassuming attorney from Albemarle, who was not a great public speaker, but wrote some of the most transformative words man ever put to paper. And we as Americans, we hear those words and we hear the Declaration of Independence and we don't think twice. Those words are uttered by my uncle, by people he was political prisoners with, in gulags, where people were being denied their individual dignity and their freedom. It fundamentally changed the way man looked at government. And it has been that beacon of hope for so many people throughout the globe. What is so tragic is this time people are questioning whether we should even pay attention to the promissory note and whether Thomas Jefferson should simply be one discarded figure in history, that he's irrelevant. Without stopping to think that every time our country has ever strived to greater equality, once again, we don't look at Rousseau, we don't look at Confucius, we don't look at anybody in some foreign country, we look at the very same founding father that we now deride. And I think that is tragic. As I said at my table earlier tonight, the only thing we learn from history seems that nobody learns from history. Woe be us if we forget who our heroes are. UVA is a principal piece of what I call the American miracle. Same as Jamestown, same as Yorktown, same as Philadelphia. Freedom of speech is special, and it is unique, and it is a miracle. Freedom of association is special and unique, and it is a miracle. Freedom of religion is special and unique and a miracle. And there's probably some people here hearing that thinking it's not. Look throughout all of human history. How do you define government? Might makes right. If I have the power, I'm going to determine how you live your life, or I'm going to actually own you. Or if you own land, I'm going to take it away from you. Because I have the power and you don't. Because I'm in control. I'm an emperor, I'm a king, whatever title you want to make it, it's the same principle. Might makes right. Part of the miracle of this country is that we were going to do things very, very differently than how the rest of the world operated. 4,000 years of human history, and our democracy is a simply blip on that timeline. If you blink, you'll miss it. It is a precious, precious thing. Axios reported just last week a study that in 2011, 49% of the globe lived under what would be considered an autocratic regime without individual freedom. You say people don't learn from history. That number today is 70%. 70% of the globe live in regimes and societies totally different to the one we take advantage of every day. The 1619 Project decides to distill the entire American journey that we're on into an economic argument. It couldn't be more wrong. One of Jefferson's genius is he would refer to America as the last best hope on earth. Abraham Lincoln later adopted it. Pause for a second and think about this. When Jefferson uttered those words, we were maybe 20 years old as a country, if that. I don't think anybody in Europe viewed us as the last best hope for anything. Part of Jefferson's genius is he knew what we could become as a people, as a country. And I think that is entirely critical for us to recognize that whether it is protesters in Taiwan, protesters in Tiananmen Square, in gulags, they go back to that promissory note that Mr. Jefferson laid forth. And it breaks my heart as a Virginian and as a lover of liberty that this school, which was once his baby, is now being debating and having discussion of whether he's relevant or even maybe to tear his statue down. That says so much about where academia is right now. It is fashionable for young people to trash our country. It's fashionable for the academic left to trash our country. This is a big issue. In many ways, I had a veteran at an event I was with Governor Youngkin. We called it a national security issue. And I thought he was being a little trite, candidly. You hear all sorts of things at these rallies. But he asked me this. He said, let me ask you a question, Youngkin, which I'm 46. How do you recruit somebody, a man or a woman, to be willing to die for a country that they are taught from day one in academia is irredeemable and is broken and can't be fixed? Gosh, does that put things in perspective? We hear about terms like microaggression. You just have to look what's happening in Ukraine right now to see what real aggression looks like. In Oregon, among the one of my old paralegals was from Oregon, and she said, we have an expression in the logging community there that you do not know how a tall tree is until you knock it down. I pray our world doesn't live in a society we don't realize what America is. The bottom line is, it doesn't mean we don't teach all of our history. Absolutely should. We have dark, horrific chapters in our nation's history. We should read it and study it so we don't repeat it. But it also means we should celebrate where we got it right. We are the most successful, multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-religious society in the history of the world, and no one comes close. And if you don't believe me, here's a simple exercise for you. After this dinner engagement tonight, go on YouTube and type in Tokyo Summer Olympics opening ceremony, the most recent Summer Olympics, and watch the Parade of Nations. 119 countries walk into that stadium. 119. Watch the whole thing. There is only one country out of 119 that when those athletes walk in, they look like everybody. Every race, every color, every creed. What other country can make that claim? So it doesn't mean that we don't recognize where we have fallen far short of our ideal. But it also means we can step back and say, man, we have been that last best hope on earth for so many people that brought my mother here. My favorite thing to do as a state delegate, and COVID shut down a lot of things, unfortunately shut down these ceremonies. We're getting back started again, our naturalization ceremonies. If you ever want to feel proud as an American, attend one. Go to the federal courthouse and slip in the back. My hope one day is I can get an invite to do the one up in Monticello. That'd be like a bucket list item. Because one of my earliest memories was being a 6-year-old child and seeing my mother become a U.S. citizen. So the great joy of being able to address them when I talk about our heritage and I talk about Mr. Jefferson. By the way, they appreciate Thomas Jefferson's legacy, sadly, much more than too many people in academia do. Last one I did, there were 116 people from 57 different countries. And I said, it's one of the honors of my life to be among the first to welcome you to our American family. They know this country is not irredeemable and broken. They know this is the country of opportunity and hope. And when they hear that knock on the door, they can finally rest. I mentioned there's a crisis in education. There's a poll done by the Wall Street Journal about a week before Thanksgiving. In which they asked this question, they said, do you think it's okay to shout down the political opinions of the people you disagree with? college students. 66% of college students said yes. What's even more difficult is 23% on top of that 66% said it's okay to use violence to do so. That means that 89% of American college students do not think that we should have a free exchange of ideas. That is stunning to me. So, Professor, thank you for signing the letter to the Cavalier. It's the Cavalier Daily, right? Did I just butcher that? Sorry. Because the fact that a sitting vice president would be invited to this university to be spoken, to speak and address in the free exchange of ideas, and you would have an editorial saying the speech was somehow violence. It says all that we need to know about how far we veered off this idea of free exchange. So thank you for standing up. I want to appreciate that. The other thing that we're kind of tackling with is that we are having great debates, and I love to say you can't get to the right answer if you don't ask the right questions. The question is not why is there poverty? Poverty is the default state of the human existence. The real question is why is there wealth? So I love to speak to high school and college campuses. And I go through this mental exercise. I said, the year I was born in 76, bicentennial baby, 4 years later, 1980, over 25% of the globe lived on less than $2 a day. That is considered starvation level poverty. That number today is less than 5%. We've seen over 1.5 billion people in the last 40 years be lifted out of starvation level poverty. It is the greatest eradication of poverty in human history. We've never seen anything like it. And I asked these students this question: what happened? What led to the greatest eradication of poverty in human history? Nobody knows the answer. I did have somebody tell me Obamacare. Another person said the United Nations. It's a word that's barely spoken on college campuses now. It's free markets, capitalism. It's a dirty word. I feel like a trap door is about to open. I'm going to fall through just by saying it on a college campus. Poll young people, as many people think socialism is a better form, a better economic system to form society than free markets, which is nothing more than the free exchange of ideas and goods. That if you have a talent, you can be rewarded for it. It's an amazing thing when you reward talent. The arts flourish, business flourishes, technology explodes. Greatest eradication of poverty in human history, yet just as many young people who are now voters think socialism is a better form to organize our society. What are we teaching in our schools? I got asked this at one school about my opinion about socialism and about it worked. I said, well, the year Fidel Castro took power in Cuba, Cuba had the same GDP as Italy. And the year he died, it had the same GDP as Sudan. So I don't think socialism works that much, in my personal opinion. It's not just talking about the free exchange of ideas, as much as talking about what is the underpinning of the entire system that has created more wealth and more prosperity and more second chances than any country that's ever existed on the face of the planet. And so I was on my retreat, Clark Kilmore, Victoria was with me, and we were talking about kind of our mission statement, and I said, you know, we're working through that, but I said, if there's anything I want to know my office to be known for, it's respecting the dignity of the individual. Part of my faith, Imago Dei, is everybody's made in the image of God, has intrinsic self-worth. But the dignity of the individual, you being able to choose and pursue your own dreams and be able to speak freely and be able to worship God according to the dictates of your conscience. Because I know how precious that is. I'm going to end with this. I think our college campuses should be a model, hopefully, of how we elevate public discourse instead of pushing it down. I think we have seen some incredibly coarse political discourse emerge in America. There's a lot of reasons for it. I heard someone say that politics is downstream from culture. There's probably a lot of truth to that. I think both parties have been guilty of it. I think it's mindful, though, to realize how big the stakes are. I had a wise Marine once tell me that if you go to Arlington National Cemetery and you walk along those Stars of Davids and those crosses, there's not an R or a D next to anyone's name. So always be mindful that someone who maybe thinks very, very differently than you gave the last full measure of devotion to this amazing, wonderful country. In other words, the people that think differently than us politically, they're not our enemies. So let's stop acting like it. I'll end with this. There's a great story about an Italian immigrant. The first time he saw the Statue of Liberty. And he said, that light is the greatest light the world has seen since the start of it. As a child of an immigrant, I'm grateful I could breathe the air as a free man. As a child of an immigrant, I'm grateful to be a Virginian. I'm so grateful for the legacy that you all are trying to preserve. When over 70% of the globe no longer lives under freedom, when we have so many young people who think we no longer should have a free exchange of ideas, they're questioning the very nature of that promissory note. Thank you for what you do, trying to preserve the promissory note that has given so many second chances to so many people and have brought them all over here to live in the bosom of freedom. Thank you.
We're not going to let him get away with just giving us a speech and going back to the table. We've got a few questions. I gave him fair warning that the first one would be one that we would go directly to the heart of the matter. Mr. Attorney General, who will be the next General Counsel of the University of Your tap shoes are on.
We're going through a vigorous process. I can't comment on that. I do think we have a crisis of freedom of speech in all of academia, and that's something that's mindful as we kind of work through that process. But I am a measure twice, cut once, that kind of guy, and so I am being thorough, but you'll know when you know.
I can take a hint. Another question. Will the university be allowed to permit admissions purely on the basis of diversity versus merit?
Well, you're having a case right now. I'm not trying to get bore you with lawyer talk. I apologize. 95% of lawyers give the rest of us a bad name, so sorry. Grutter versus Bolger was a case 2002 or 2003 dealing with Michigan admission standards. And we won, I think it is students for fair admissions versus Harvard. I want to say UNC is part of that as well. That has been taken up by the Supreme Court. We will see what they say. I would say, though, that one thing we have seen in higher ed, I have said before that anti-Semitism is the world's oldest form of bigotry. Tragically, though, the only current state-sanctioned form of bigotry is against Asian Americans. You're seeing that in higher ed. You're seeing that in Thomas Jefferson High School in Virginia. which was majority minority high school, but they determined they didn't have the right minorities. And so as one Korean American mom shared with me, my child's dream has been to go to TJ, and I'm realizing now they've had straight A's their entire career, and I'm realizing they're going to be denied that ability because of who they are, because they're Korean American. No child should ever feel that in America they're being denied their dreams because of how they look and who they are, what their skin color is. That is just outrageous. I think it was Sandra Day O'Connor. If it was a different Supreme Court justice, I apologize. The best way to fight racism is not practice racism. And the fact that you have young Asian American students being denied their dream, I think is intolerable. I'll find an amicus brief in that case. We will see what the Supreme Court rules. I am a balls and strikes guy. I'll follow the Supreme Court. I'm hopeful that they will give Asian American students and reaffirm you can't discriminate on the basis of race in this country. And I can't believe in the year 2022 that we're even having this debate in academia, unfortunately.
What will happen to the students who are disenrolled for not getting their COVID vaccine? Can they be offered readmittance back on their track?
I think you're probably dealing, yes, they can. It's somewhat of a contract issue. They signed a contract to attend the school, they paid tuition. I don't have those terms in front of me. So obviously the university can allow them immediately. The question of whether they can get monetary damages, I don't know. I think it would probably be hard in a court of law because elections matter. You had a previous governor and a previous attorney general that issued an executive order in the attorney general's opinion saying that they had to have a vaccine in order to be a student. It has been interesting coming into a new office. I like to say it's like moving to a new house and you're opening up closets and you're finding, leaks here or whatever. That was one of my first attorney general's opinions. And it was an amazing thing. There's a section of the code, I think, 2.2-211, but don't quote me on that, please. There's a section of the code that lists, here are 8 vaccines. If you're going to attend school in Virginia, you have to have these 8 vaccines. Measles, a couple of others. COVID-19 is not on that list. What's even worse, back when my friends on the other side of the aisle controlled the governor, mansion, the Senate, and the State House, they never even introduced the bill. There's a way to add COVID-19 to that list. It's called the legislative process. You introduce the bill, get to the committee that's assigned to you, have public hearing, you get to the House, gets to the State Senate committee, gets to the State Senate, gets to the governor's desk, becomes law. That's, I hate to do how a bill becomes law, but that's the process. In democracy, people lose their faith in democracy when things are just done with a stroke of a pen. Well, it wasn't on that list. Here's what's the most amazing. When I asked that section about the prior AG's opinion, and we basically just said, listen, COVID-19 is not on the list, so you can't enforce it. There's obviously a process if you wanted to add it. It's called the legislative process. It was never done. A bill was not so much as introduced to do so. That section said, your AG's opinion is what we originally came up with. But the previous regime did not like it, so they just decided to ignore an entire section of the code and just decide that universities have this right to impose this, right? And then, of course, there's all this shock in the general with some members of the media that I did this amazing thing, which is, what does the law say? What does the code of Virginia say about all of right? That issue back to the students, I do not know what was exactly the contract they've signed. They can be readmitted, whether they can receive some type of, I don't know, to be candid with you. So, I don't know if that was your answer.
Your answer.
All right.
I share your admiration for anybody and everybody who's gone through the naturalization process in America. My family went through Ellis Island, my mother's family. And a question that follows on to that, will the policy of admitting illegal aliens to the university be allowed to continue?
Again, balls and strikes, that's the law in Virginia. There was a bill that was passed when my friends on the other side of the aisle controlled the House and the Senate governor's mansion that allowed in-state tuition for those that were illegal immigrants. And that's the current law. So yeah, it's allowed. Right now, I don't see that changing as long as there's one party that controls the House, one party controls the state Senate. Elections matter. What I said frustrates you, that's great. Find a candidate you want to support and make sure that you have like-minded individuals in the state Senate to change the law. And that's the proper process.
The recent extension of a number of the Ryan administration officers to employment terms suspiciously beyond Governor Youngkin's term seems sort of an in-your-face to the governor. What sort of actions do you or the governor view as sufficiently egregious that Board of Visitors members could be removed for cause? And was this close to the line?
Light questions you guys are asking. Whether we classify, I think the standard is malfeasance. Listen, this goes back to elections matter. You need a good Board of Visitors. That's the decision they made. Candidly, it's not that much different than what you see with college coaches. Somebody's a hot name, contract's nowhere near to be up, they sign them to a longer extension, just being honest with you. I don't know all the factors that went into this decision. Personally, I find it a little bit curious that they did this well before the first board appointment. But sometimes there's a perception that you have a well-regarded name in higher academia that's a college president, just like a college basketball or football coach. And we're getting signed to an extension to make sure that somebody doesn't come in and try to take them away. Whether that's what they were thinking, I don't know. I do not think personally it rises that standard. It does raise a lot of question marks. I would say that if you have an interest in applying to the Board of Visitors, you probably should go ahead and go to the Secretary of the Commonwealth's website to do so if you have an interest. I know that the governor has a strong interest in making sure we have strong boards, and probably no greater interest than our higher ed.
I think that is a good one for us to conclude on.